Step aside, or I will have you removed." She walked on board like she belonged there, because she did. But to him, just another black woman in first class, she was a threat, not a passenger. When he slapped her in front of everyone, the cabin froze. What no one knew: she owned the entire airline. If you believe no one should ever be judged by their appearance, hit that like button. Subscribe to the channel for stories that expose truth, and drop your city in the comments so we know who's standing with dignity today. The sky over Los Angeles was crisp and clear that morning, one of those rare, smog-free days where even the mountain peaks looked razor-sharp against the blue. At a secluded corner of LAX, far from the chaos of commercial terminals, a sleek, matte black aircraft rested like a predator poised for flight. No logos, no flashy markings, just the understated elegance of wealth that never needed to prove itself. This was Astrius One, the flagship jet of Astrius Airways, a private airline reserved for the elite few who didn't fly first class. They owned the skies. Inside the VIP terminal, the energy was cool and curated. Italian marble floors gleamed beneath soft lighting. The scent of white tea and amber drifted through the air, mingling with the subtle tones of a live cello performance by a young man in a tuxedo near the corner. Passengers began arriving one by one, each escorted by personal assistants or security. Billionaire investors, entertainment moguls, heiresses with designer dogs. The kind of clientele that didn't check bags, they checked portfolios. Behind the counter stood Chase Delaney, the lead flight attendant for Astrius One. In his early 30s, square-jawed and impeccably groomed, Chase was everything the company valued in public image: polite, poised, and fiercely protective of exclusivity. He had worked this flight for nearly 6 years and carried himself like a maitre d' at a Michelin-starred restaurant, with charm for the right people and suspicion for everyone else. "Welcome aboard, Mr. Beringer," he said, smiling at a hedge fund manager who barely glanced up from his phone. Chase turned to check the next name on the manifest when the doors opened again. She walked in alone. No entourage, no bodyguards, no flurry of assistants trailing her like butterflies. Just a tall, composed woman dressed in an ankle-length cream coat, cinched at the waist with a simple belt. Her skin was a deep brown, her hair swept up into a low bun that shimmered under the terminal lights. Her walk was slow and purposeful, heels clicking lightly against the marble, as if she were stepping into a meeting she was born to lead. Her name was Ariel Moncrief, and from the moment she entered, everything shifted, not in sound, but in attention. Every conversation in the lounge lowered by a decibel. One man paused his sip of espresso. A woman adjusted her sunglasses just to get a better look. Chase narrowed his eyes, not with recognition, but with calculation. Something felt off. She wasn't famous, not in the celebrity sense. And yet, she didn't carry the flustered air of someone who'd wandered in by mistake. She moved like she had every right to be there. Ariel approached the counter and handed over a slim, leather-encased passport and a digital boarding confirmation from her phone. Her voice was calm and rich. "Good morning. I'm in 1A. Chase took the documents but didn't scan them immediately. Instead, he tilted his head slightly, eyes scanning her face, her coat, her bag, minimalist, structured, but unbranded. "Are you sure this is the right terminal?" he asked, too politely. "I'm sure," Ariel replied, unfazed. "This flight is private charter. Guest list only. I'm on that list." Chase let out a small, almost imperceptible laugh, more like a breath of doubt. "Of course." One moment. Instead of scanning her boarding pass, he turned to his tablet and began tapping, scrolling slowly. Too slowly. Behind Ariel, another passenger arrived, an aging tech mogul in sneakers and a hoodie. Chase instantly lit up. "Mr. Vance. So glad to see you again. Right this way, same seat as always." The mogul gave Ariel a passing glance, curious but silent. Chase resumed scanning through the manifest like a man stalling. Ariel remained still. Then, with the kind of quiet that comes from power held, not performed, she said, "Is there a problem, Mr. Delaney?" Chase blinked. The way she said his name, it wasn't a guess. She knew who he was. "No problem," he said quickly. "Just verifying." She smiled faintly. "Take your time." He hated that smile. 10 minutes passed. Ariel still stood, uninvited to board. Other passengers arrived. Some gave her side eyes. Others offered tight-lipped smiles, the kind used at charity galas to acknowledge someone they couldn't place but assumed didn't belong. Whisper started. Who is she? She just walked in alone? Maybe she's staff. Chase finally looked up. I'm sorry, but I can't find your name in the manifest. Ariel raised an eyebrow. That's strange. It was confirmed directly through Astrius. I'll need to make a call, he said flatly. By all means. But instead of calling headquarters, Chase tapped into the crew chat and typed a short message to the co-pilot. Possible intruder. Claims seat 1A. Looks suspicious. He stared at the screen, hesitating. What about her looked suspicious? The fact that she was calm, alone, or the fact that she was black? Chase couldn't answer that. He just felt something didn't fit. And in his world, people who didn't fit were either threats or mistakes. He looked up again. Ma'am, I'm going to ask you to step aside. We need to finish boarding our confirmed passengers. I am a confirmed passenger. We'll sort this out in a moment. But I need you to move aside, please. Ariel didn't move. I won't be stepping aside, Mr. Delaney. Either you scan the pass, or you explain to your superior why you refuse to. His jaw clenched. If you don't cooperate, I'll call security. You're welcome to. It was a standoff. Passengers had stopped pretending not to watch. One woman whispered, God, she's so composed. I'd be screaming. Another muttered, yeah, but what if she really doesn't belong here? I mean, one. Just then, Captain Reynolds, a silver-haired man with 20 years of flight experience, stepped out of the cockpit. Everything okay here? He asked lightly. Chase straightened. Captain, this passenger is insisting she's in 1A, but I don't see her name. Captain Reynolds looked at Ariel, and something in his face changed. Recognition. A quick flicker of surprise that morphed into discomfort. Then discipline. He didn't say her name. He simply looked at Chase and said, let her board. Chase blinked. Sir, I said, let her board. But, that's an order, Chase. The silence was electric. Ariel didn't gloat. She didn't speak. She walked through the gate slowly, her heels echoing in the stunned hush. And as she stepped onto the aircraft, the vibe shifted again, not from her, but from everyone watching her go. She passed rows of plush leather seats, untouched champagne flutes, and luxury gift bags. Her seat 1A waited at the front, positioned like a throne. She Saturday opened a leather notebook and said nothing. Not yet, because the sky hadn't cracked open yet, but it would. And when it did, everyone would remember that they had seen her and judged her not for who she was, but for what she looked like. And that mistake was about to cost someone everything. The hum of the cabin was soft, almost sacred, the kind of silence that existed only in places built for power. As the last of the elite passengers settled into their plush, hand-stitched leather seats, the soft chime of the boarding complete signal echoed through the jet. A flight attendant offered imported sparkling water, garnished with a blood orange wedge, to the man in 2B. Another refilled the champagne flute of a woman scrolling idly through a tablet, displaying stock portfolios and beachfront estates. And in seat 1A, Ariel Moncrief sat silently, flipping through her notes. No one approached her. No one greeted her. Not even Chase Delaney, who stood a few feet away pretending to recheck passenger manifests, stealing glances toward the front like a lion pacing just beyond a fence it wished it could break. The captain had given her clearance to board. But Chase wasn't finished. Not in his mind. He watched her. Watching him. There was no flash of arrogance in her eyes. No smug grin. Just an unbearable calm that made him feel smaller with every passing second. He finally made his move. Striding purposefully down the aisle, he stopped beside her, leaned down slightly, and lowered his voice to a confidential tone that barely hid the bitterness beneath. Ms. Moncrief, was it? She didn't look up. You've seen my name. Well, Ms. Moncrief, I'm afraid I need to verify your documentation again. We've had a few issues with fraudulent bookings lately, and she closed her folder, slowly, and looked up at him. You're not here to verify anything, she said with quiet precision. You're here to make me uncomfortable, to assert control where it doesn't belong. Chase's jaw tightened. I don't know who you think you are. I know exactly who I am, she interrupted gently. The question is, do you know who I am? Passengers nearby began watching more openly now. The businessman in 3A leaned sideways, pretending to adjust his jacket, but really to eavesdrop. The influencer in 4C had stopped filming her B-roll and quietly lowered her phone to record instead. Chase straightened, puffed up slightly. If you're not willing to cooperate, I will be forced to escalate this. Ariel leaned back in her seat, unbothered. Escalate away. And just like that, Chase snapped. He turned toward the front galley, grabbed the cabin phone, and called ground control. This is Lead Attendant Delaney. I have an unverified passenger refusing to deplane. Requesting security boarding immediate. Every head turned. The atmosphere shifted from chilled luxury to cold tension. You don't have to do this, Ariel said behind him, voice still even. You're creating a moment you will not be able to undo. You think you're untouchable? He spat, the mask slipping. You think you can just walk onto this aircraft and sit in 1A without raising a single flag? Who are you two? He never finished the sentence. Because in the space between one heartbeat and the next, Ariel rose slowly from her seat. Not abruptly, not defiantly, but with grace, like the sun rising. She turned fully to face him. Not a flicker of fear, not a drop of apology, just presence. I paid for this seat, Mr. Delaney, she said clearly, her voice resonating now not just to him but to the cabin. The same as everyone else here. But let's not pretend this is about tickets. Chase's face flushed crimson. You're disturbing the other passengers. No, she said, voice low but cutting. You are. That was the moment he lost it. Without warning, without hesitation, Chase lunged forward and slapped her. A crack filled the cabin, a sharp sound that silenced even the engines and the minds of those who heard it. Gasps rang out like scattered gunfire. A woman screamed. Someone dropped a champagne glass that shattered at their feet. And Ariel Moncrief? She didn't move, didn't flinch. She simply turned her head back, slow as moonlight, and looked him in the eye. The slap hadn't bruised her, but the moment had bruised everyone else's illusions. A woman in 2C rose from her seat. What the hell did I just witness? Chase looked stunned, almost as if he had been the one hit. She's trespassing. She doesn't belong here. I was just. You assaulted her. The businessman in 3A interrupted. And I got the whole thing on video. Me too, said another voice, holding up a phone. And so did the rest of the internet in 5-4. Chase backed up, wide-eyed, realizing he had crossed a line there was no walking back from. Ariel still hadn't raised her voice. Instead, she reached into her tote and pulled out a black folio. She opened it with delicate fingers and flipped it to a sleek silver badge embedded inside. The words engraved on it glimmered under the LED lights. Ariel Moncrief, founder and CEO, Astrius Airways. Time stopped. Chase staggered backward. Passengers' mouths dropped open. The woman who had called her, probably staff, earlier audibly whispered, "Oh my God." Ariel held the badge calmly for everyone to see. "I didn't board this flight uninvited," she said, turning slowly to address the full cabin now. "I built this airline." She looked at Chase again. "And I employ you." The weight of that sentence crushed the air out of the room. Then she turned to the nearest phone panel, pressed a secure line, and spoke a single sentence into the receiver. "Activate protocol, R1. Lock the aircraft. Ground departure. Legal team on board in 3 minutes." She hung up. Chase opened his mouth again, but it was too late. The cabin door opened with a hiss, and a small team entered. 2 in Astrius legal uniform. 1 federal marshal, silent and observing. And a sharply dressed black woman in a gray power suit with an earpiece and a tablet already mid-swipe. It was Kendra Shaw, Ariel's executive chief of operations. "Ms. Moncrief," Kendra said with a respectful nod. "We're in position." Chase tried to walk away, but the marshal blocked him. Kendra didn't raise her voice. She simply read aloud, "Mr. Chase Delaney, you are hereby suspended pending full investigation for violation of company policy, abuse of authority, and assault on a senior executive. You are relieved of all duties effective immediately." No, wait. You don't understand, she didn't look like. He stopped again, because he finally realized the one sentence he had been circling around this whole time was the exact one that would destroy him. Passengers murmured. Phones kept filming. And Chase Delaney was escorted off the aircraft. Not by Ariel, not by security, but by the very justice he thought he could manipulate. As the cabin door sealed shut again, no one moved. Ariel returned to her seat in 1A. She didn't smile, didn't gloat, didn't address the room with some triumphant declaration. She simply said, "Now, we may proceed." And the silence that followed was not just of shock, that it was of reckoning. The engines roared back to life, the cabin pressurized, and Astrius 1 taxied toward the private runway, A heavy silence still clung to the air like humidity before a storm. The passengers aboard this exclusive flight, men and women who typically walked through the world untouched, now sat in a space no money could shield them from discomfort. Not because they feared turbulence, but because they had just witnessed a truth they could no longer ignore. The woman seated in 1A wasn't just any passenger. She wasn't a social experiment or a viral stunt. She was the mind behind the wings that carried them. Arielle Moncrief, the founder, CEO, and public enigma behind one of the most elite private airlines in the country. And they had all just watched her get slapped in her own home. Some looked at their hands. Others looked at their phones. None could quite meet her eyes. The man in 2B, Daniel Hastings, a former state senator turned real estate magnate, fidgeted with his wedding ring. The woman across the aisle, Leona Graves, known for her lifestyle empire and whispered political connections, whispered to her assistant, "We need to get ahead of this if it leaks." "She has cameras on this plane, right?" The assistant whispered back, "The whole cabin. Full audio. Everything's recorded." "Damn." Back in row 3, Ethan Connors, an early crypto investor who had made more enemies than friends, tapped furiously on his phone. He wasn't texting. He was uploading. The video of the slap, the confrontation, and the cold reveal of Arielle's identity. He'd kept the camera rolling longer than most. Not because he cared, but because controversy made numbers. Numbers built platforms. And this was viral gold. He hit publish. At the front, Arielle sat quietly, the hum of the plane now a buffer between her and the world. She wasn't thinking about Chase Delaney anymore. That was already being handled by her lawyers, her HR department, her PR crisis team. Her mind was somewhere deeper, colder, not in revenge, but in memory of every hallway she'd walked through where someone asked if she was in the wrong office, of every board meeting where she was assumed to be the assistant, of the investors who asked to speak to the real CEO. The slap wasn't just a moment that IT was the sum of a lifetime of silent bruises. An hour into the flight, the curtains separating the service galley from the passenger area fluttered open. Arielle didn't look up, but someone approached. Slowly, timid footsteps, then a voice. "Ms. Moncrief." She turned her head slightly. Standing in the aisle was Nia, the junior flight attendant who had served only 4 private flights before this one. She looked terrified, but determined. I wanted to say, I'm sorry." Arielle studied her. For what? For not saying anything when it happened. For watching. For letting it get that far. Arielle nodded slowly, not dismissively, but with grace. "You didn't create that moment," she said. "But you now choose what kind of woman you'll be the next time something like it happens." Nia's eyes welled up. She nodded and returned to the galley. And it was the first moment of honesty the cabin had seen since takeoff. Minutes later, another voice broke through. This one wasn't quiet. "Excuse me." It was the woman in 4D, Margot Whitman, an opinionated tech executive with a history of speaking a little too loud in quiet rooms. She stood up, holding her phone. "This has already gone viral," she announced. "It's everywhere." TMZ picked it up. So did Insider and Black Voices. Twitter's exploding. No one responded. "I just think we should be prepared. This flight, it's not just a flight anymore. We're sitting in a live PR event." Arielle didn't even turn around. Instead, she calmly said, "Then perhaps it's time we treat it like one." The cabin fell into a stunned hush again. Halfway through the flight, a video message arrived on every screen embedded in the back of each leather headrest. Normally used for flight safety or company ads, this one was new. It was Arielle, filmed in studio lighting with her signature calm poise. "Welcome aboard Astrius Airways," she said in the pre-recorded footage. "We believe that luxury is not just about comfort, it's about character. About how we treat one another when no one's watching." She paused, but someone is always watching. The video faded to black, replaced by the Astrius logo and a single line. "Excellence begins with equity." It was subtle, but pointed, and this time personal. Back in the galley, a whispered conversation between 2 passengers now turned into hushed debate. "She should have just told him who she was from the start," one muttered. "But why should she have to?" another challenged. "You don't see Bezos needing to flash a badge." A younger passenger spoke up. She didn't know anyone a damn explanation. And that was the beginning of what no one expected on a luxury flight. Conscience. One by one, the passengers began to speak, not to Arielle, but to each other, about what they had witnessed, what they hadn't said, what they now regretted. Then someone stood up, Daniel Hastings, the former senator. The man who had once filibustered a civil rights bill out of fear it would encourage performative outrage. He cleared his throat. Ms. Moncrief. Ariel turned her head. I misjudged you. That's not easy for me to admit. His voice wavered. But I watched that man treat you like a trespasser on your own aircraft. And I sat there, silent. Not because I agreed, but because silence was easier. She watched him, that he wasn't asking for forgiveness, that he was confessing. I just want to say thank you for not responding with what most of us would have considered justified anger. You showed us how real power walks. Ariel nodded once, and that was all. By the time the jet began its descent into Teterboro Airport in New Jersey, the tension had shifted again. No longer hostile, now reflective. Passengers looked out windows not with boredom, but with thought. And when the wheels touched the runway and the aircraft taxied to the private hangar, a message lit up on every screen. Thank you for flying with us. But more importantly, thank you for watching closely. And beneath it, a final phrase. Now ask yourself, who did you assume I was? The doors opened, but no one rushed to disembark, not right away. Because somewhere between 35,000 feet and the runway, they had all landed in a different place entirely. They say a slap is just a sound. But on that day, the sound shattered something far bigger than dignity. It cracked open a system. The moment Ariel Moncrief was struck by Chase Delaney aboard her own aircraft, Astrius 1, it didn't stay within the polished walls of the jet's first-class cabin. It didn't remain just an awkward silence among elite passengers or a corporate HR issue to be managed behind closed doors. That sound traveled. And by the time the plane touched down in New Jersey, the entire nation had heard it. The first video hit the internet 23 minutes into the flight. Blurry, but unmistakable. Chase lunging forward. Ariel standing still. The audible crack. The gasp. Her hand reaching into her bag. The badge. The stillness. Her voice. I employ you. It took just one tweet to ignite the fire at News Decoded. Breaking. Black woman slapped on private flight. Turns out she owns the airline. Video has surfaced of a racially charged assault aboard a luxury jet. Viewer discretion advised. Hashtag Astrius1, hashtag Justice in the Air. Retweets, 110,000 in the first hour. Views, 5 million by the time they landed. Within 45 minutes, every major outlet had picked it up. CNN called it the slap heard across first class. MSNBC called it power misjudged. Fox News predictably asked, should CEOs carry ID on board? By the time Ariel stepped off the plane, a wall of black SUVs and media drones hovered around the private terminal. Her team, already in full crisis response mode, guided her into a waiting vehicle without a word. Her face was calm, hair still in place, her cheek slightly red, not from the slap, from the thousands of camera flashes that met her like gunfire. Inside the SUV, her executive assistant Kendra Shaw sat beside her, tablet in hand, phone buzzing every 10 seconds. Media storms hitting peak velocity, Kendra said, scrolling. We're being praised, crucified, and everything in between. Ariel didn't speak. She was watching a playback of the video on mute, over and over. Slap. Stare. Reveal. Power shift. HR's already launched an internal audit, Kendra continued. Legal has suspended Chase and filed preliminary charges for assault. The FAA just called. They're asking for a formal hearing. Still, no response. Then finally, Ariel said, do we have footage from the cockpit? Yes. Full angle. I want it. Kendra paused. You're thinking of releasing it? No. Ariel said. I'm thinking of showing it to every Astrius employee first thing tomorrow morning. Meanwhile, across the country, the narrative fractured like glass under heat. Talk shows debated it. YouTubers analyzed it frame by frame. Influencers gave hot takes from penthouses. And activists reignited old conversations under new light. How does a black woman build an empire and still get treated like an intruder in it? At universities, it sparked symposiums. In barbershops, it became gospel. At boardrooms, it became fear. Because Ariel's silence wasn't retreat, IT was strategy. That night, Chase Delaney sat in a cramped corporate housing apartment, already locked out of his work emails, his LinkedIn flooded with public fury. and his phone vibrating non-stop with messages that ranged from former coworkers distancing themselves to strangers threatening lawsuits. His face, caught mid-slur in the viral clip, was now the symbol of unconscious bias in pressed uniform. A part of him still believed he hadn't done anything wrong. Another part was starting to realize he had never questioned the way he looked at people like Ariel. Not until now, back in Manhattan, in the 72nd floor of the Astrius Executive Tower, Ariel stood before a full glass window overlooking the skyline. She had changed into a tailored navy suit. Her hair let down. No makeup. No press. Just her and the city she'd conquered now watching her back. Kendra walked in quietly. The board wants to issue a public apology. No, Ariel said. They don't get to speak for me. They think it'll stabilize investor confidence. Investor confidence is built on trust, she said. And right now, the people don't trust boardrooms. They trust honesty. Kendra handed her a single sheet of paper. What's this? Every staff complaint filed against Chase in the last 3 years, she said. 6 of them. All women of color. All dismissed by middle management. Ariel closed her eyes. There it was, not a slap, a pattern. And patterns were the real danger. She turned to her assistant. Schedule an all-hands meeting. Virtual. Every department. Every region. Tomorrow morning. And the topic? Her answer was simple. Culture reset. The next morning, the Astrius logo appeared on over 7,000 employee screens. Ariel's face followed live. No PR filter. No corporate veneer. Just her. She didn't apologize for making things uncomfortable. She didn't cry. She told the truth. I was mistaken for someone who didn't belong. Not in a foreign space, but in one I built. Not by accident, but by the very culture we claim to have moved past. She paused, letting it settle. We haven't moved past anything. We've just gotten better at hiding it. More silence. Effective today, we are overhauling every leadership channel in this company. Hiring, training, complaint reviews, unconscious bias education. All of it. From the boardroom to the baggage crew. Because what happened wasn't a scandal. It was a symptom. One final sentence. And I'd rather ground this airline entirely than let it take off on inequality again. Applause didn't follow. Just breath. Real breath. From thousands of people who had finally been seen. And outside the headquarters, in streets from Atlanta to Oakland to London, people marched. Not in protest, but in recognition. They held signs not just with Ariel's name, but with their own. I belong here too. We built this too. Leaders don't need to prove they lead. Because Ariel Moncrief hadn't just turned a moment of humiliation into justice. She had turned justice into a mirror and forced the world to look. In the days that followed, headlines screamed her name. Talk shows dissected every micro-expression in the now iconic footage. Think pieces flooded news feeds. Half the world wanted to turn her into a symbol, the other half into a warning. But Ariel Moncrief, she remained silent. Not absent. Not withdrawn. Intentional. Because Ariel had long learned that in a world obsessed with volume, dignity was a sharper blade than outrage. Behind her silence was not retreat, but history. A history few knew, a history fewer still could understand. Ariel had grown up in a one-bedroom apartment on the south side of Baltimore, Maryland, raised by her grandmother, Marcy Moncrief, a retired domestic worker who had never flown a day in her life, but told Ariel stories every night about flying not in planes, but in dreams. You gotta lift your mind higher than what you see, her grandmother would whisper, brushing Ariel's hair under a dim kitchen light. 'Cause what you see will lie to you every day. But what you know, that's where the truth lives. Ariel was the kind of child who read flight manuals at 12, audited online business classes at 15, and could recite every airport code by 17. She didn't just love planes. She loved systems, how they moved, who they served, and more importantly, who they didn't. At 19, she earned a full ride to MIT. At 22, she graduated top of her class in aerospace systems engineering. At 24, she was already being recruited by private defense contractors. But she didn't take a single one of their offers. She had one goal, to build her own sky. By 30, Ariel had raised her first $8 million in capital, mostly from black investors, women-led funds, and one retired pilot who said, "I never thought I'd live to see a black woman own the cockpit, let alone the plane." Her airline, Astrius Airways, launched quietly. It didn't go viral. It didn't start with press.it, started with values. Luxury, discretion, equity. She built her team from the ground up: pilots, flight crews, engineers, designers. She didn't hire people who had the right look. She hired people who had the right integrity. And slowly, her airline carved a niche out of the white and gold sky, once reserved for old names and old money. By the time the incident with Chase Delaney happened, Ariel had already flown over 100 flights anonymously. No one ever questioned her. Until now. Why? Because on this flight, she didn't wear the uniform of power. She wore silence, and silence made people assume. In her office days later, Ariel stood before a wall of press clippings, most of which had now been archived behind frosted glass. She looked at the newest one. CEO struck on own jet teaches nation a new kind of power. She hated it, not because of the title, but because it reduced her to a moment when she had been building a movement. Kendra walked in, tablet in hand, hair tied back, looking exhausted but focused. New endorsements are rolling in, she said. And 34 executives want meetings. CEOs, influencers, even government agencies. What do they want? To be seen next to you. To absorb the image of your dignity. To post their support while the headlines are still fresh. Ariel didn't even blink. They want to borrow the gravity of my restraint, she said. But none of them would have stood up for me before the badge came out. Kendra nodded. They're asking if you'll speak at the Equity and Aviation Summit next week. No, I'm done speaking, Ariel said, her voice calm but carved in stone. They've heard enough sound bites. I'm going to do something better, which is, I'm going to rebuild this industry's hiring structure. Not just for StoriesDisrespect-us, but for every carrier that wants a contract with us. Kendra stared. You're going after the whole industry? No, Ariel corrected. I'm inviting them to become honest. If they decline, then yes, I'll go after them. 2 weeks later, she sat in a quiet room at the International Aviation Policy Council, across from 10 white men in Navy suits, most of whom hadn't taken her seriously 5 years ago when she pitched reforms in aviation equity hiring. Now they sat in stunned silence as she slid a folder across the table. StoriesDisrespect-us Standards of Inclusion. Inside was a full policy draft: hiring transparency, bias tracking, anonymous reporting structures, executive diversity audits, frontline employee equity training, and psychological testing for cabin crew retention and promotion. One man scoffed. This is aggressive. No, Ariel said, smiling slightly. It's overdue. Another cleared his throat. Do you really expect the industry to overhaul itself because of one isolated incident? Ariel didn't flinch. I don't expect anything, she said. I demand it. And if your companies wish to use our jets, partner with our terminals, or purchase our technology going forward, this is the new price of entry. They didn't argue again. Back in the public eye, Ariel remained elusive. No interviews, no podcast tours, no book deals. She didn't need to sell the story. Because the story had already done its job. Young girls wrote letters. Pilots who had been passed over for promotions came forward. Black flight attendants from other airlines reached out and whispered, "You made me believe again." And when a reporter finally caught up to her leaving a board meeting, they asked, "Why didn't you retaliate? Why didn't you fire him on camera?" She looked them square in the eye. "Because I wasn't raised to win moments," she said. "I was raised to win systems." And with that, she stepped into her car and vanished again. Not because she was hiding, but because you don't need to scream when the sky already carries your voice. For 2 weeks, Ariel Moncrief stood taller than ever, both in the public eye and behind the boardroom doors. Her poise, her silence, her refusal to lash out had made her not just a hero but a phenomenon. StoriesDisrespect-us Airways stock climbed 9%. Recruitment doubled. Diversity-focused aviation groups called her a visionary. Young black girls made TikToks mimicking her walk down the jet aisle, calling it the CEO stride. But power, even the righteous kind, always breeds resentment. And for some men in dark suits and older networks, Ariel's rise wasn't a triumph. It was a threat. It began quietly. A grainy image leaked to a fringe media blog. A cropped photo of Ariel at a private fundraiser 10 years ago. The headline screamed, "Exclusive, CEO Ariel Moncrief linked to Black separatist event." Then came a second piece, an anonymous source claiming Ariel used racial guilt to silence opposition, and that she had a pattern of aggression with male subordinates. The smear campaign had begun, but it didn't stay in the shadows for long. Within days, a small but determined faction within the aviation industry began whispering behind closed doors, "She's dangerous. She's making this about race when it was just a policy issue. This isn't leadership, it's vengeance disguised as reform." Emails circulated among board members of rival carriers. Political advisors began suggesting to congressional staffers that maybe she's being positioned too quickly as a national figure. It was the oldest weapon in the arsenal of institutional power. Question her legitimacy, cast doubt on her intention, twist her integrity into arrogance. But Ariel had seen it before, and this time, she came prepared. Inside her office overlooking the Hudson River, she sat before a war table figuratively and literally. A long, sleek glass boardroom table now strewn with color-coded folders, legal briefs, background reports, and personnel files. At the head of the table sat Kendra Shah, flanked by their in-house legal counsel, cybersecurity chief, and brand reputation strategist. "They're trying to drown us in noise," Kendra said. "False stories, half-clipped footage, even old internal emails being taken out of context." "Which emails?" Ariel asked without blinking. "Chase Delaney's exit interview. He's cooperating with a third-party PR firm. They're claiming his actions were the result of unclear boundaries set by leadership, implying you blurred lines of authority." Ariel leaned back in her chair. Her face was unreadable. "Let him talk," she said. The lawyer raised an eyebrow. "We can threaten a cease and desist." "No," Ariel replied calmly. "Let him speak. The louder he gets, the more people will hear how fragile he really is." But behind the scenes, the attacks grew bolder. A false employee complaint surfaced online, supposedly written by an anonymous Astrius pilot accusing Ariel of favoritism and claiming she pressured HR to hire unqualified minorities to fit a narrative. It went viral for all the wrong reasons. News sites picked it up. YouTube pundits dissected it. Troll farms pushed it into Facebook groups with alarming speed. Hashtag #ResignAriel began trending manufactured outrage disguised as organic concern. Ariel refused to panic. Instead, she told her team, "Gather every complaint, every memo, every hire and promotion in the past 24 months. I want the receipts." And they delivered. Ariel didn't just defend herself. She documented herself. She held a press conference. No tears, no dramatics, just numbers, faces, transparency. "In 2 years, our promotion rate for women of color has increased 31%. Our customer service satisfaction rate, highest in company history. Retention among formerly marginalized staff, up 45% year over year. And for those claiming I force diversity, I don't force it. I normalize it." The room was silent. Reporters scribbled like mad. And when asked about the smear campaign, she answered without missing a beat. "This isn't backlash. It's whiplash from a system that never expected me to rise." That night, something unexpected happened. A whistleblower came forward. An internal HR director from a rival airline leaked emails showing that 2 competitors had paid for the negative stories. Paid bloggers, influenced tweets, even tried to bribe a former Astrius employee to fabricate claims. The plan backfired. Spectacularly. Now it wasn't just about injustice. It was about sabotage. Ariel's calm had ignited something deeper. People weren't just defending her, they were investigating for her. Online communities, journalists, watchdog accounts, all digging. And what they found? Corruption, mismanagement, even fraud in other companies trying to drag her down. Suddenly, the narrative shifted again. Not only had Ariel survived the attack, she had outed an entire ecosystem of fear-based resistance. In her next internal company memo, she didn't gloat. She simply wrote, "When you shine light into corners that were never meant to be seen, don't be surprised if the rats start running." Behind closed doors, old money board members at Legacy Airlines met in frustration. "She's unshakable. She's turning every attack into leverage. She's too smart for a public takedown." Someone finally asked, "So what's the play now?" The room fell silent. Because the truth was, there was no play. The rules had changed. They were still playing chess. Ariel was already rewriting the game. Ariel Moncrief didn't strike back with vengeance. She struck with something far more difficult, far more enduring. Dignity. But this time, her grace wasn't quiet. It wasn't confined to a viral moment or a press release. It came as an event so bold, so unprecedented, it made every executive in the aviation world pause mid-step. She called it the Dignity Summit. The invitation was simple, elegant, an embossed card delivered by courier to every major airline CEO, COO, union leader, and aviation policy director in North America. No pretense, no RSVP option, just a firm note. You are expected. Dignity is not a concept. It's a policy. Held inside a restored 1930s hangar in New Jersey, once segregated, now reclaimed, Ariel transformed it into a space of reckoning. Long wooden tables replaced stages. No podiums. No VIP areas. No press allowed. There were no name tags, just conversation cards with one question printed on each. Have you ever ignored something that didn't affect you? The room was packed. The CEOs of 4 of the top 5 U.S. airlines showed up in person. So did federal regulators, civil rights attorneys, hiring consultants, and representatives from marginalized employee groups, many of whom had never before been invited to the same table as executives. At the center of it all sat Ariel. No armor, no entourage, just a navy blazer, a sharp pen, and a folder labeled Truth Sessions. The air was tense, but electrified, because what they all knew but none wanted to say was this. She didn't need them, but they needed her. The summit began not with a speech, but with a screening. A 12-minute documentary-style video titled Unseen Altitudes. It included stories of flight attendants pushed into closets to cry after racist passengers were allowed to stay on board. Pilots passed over for promotions. Baggage handlers told to clean faster or be replaced. Stories from every airline represented in the room. And it ended on a stark screen that read, "When leadership is silent, abuse gets loud." When the lights came up, no one clapped. They just sat there, eyes glazed, mouths pressed shut, until Ariel stood and said one word. Now. The Truth Sessions began. No agenda, no scripted panels, just brutal, honest, uncomfortable conversations. Ariel posed the first question. How many of you know the racial demographics of your executive team by memory? Only one hand went up. Why not? She asked. No one answered. She leaned forward. You track quarterly profits by the minute, but you can't remember the number of women of color with decision-making power in your own buildings. One executive shifted in his chair. Another cleared his throat. And Ariel smiled just slightly. Good, she said. Discomfort means we're finally talking about something real. As the day unfolded, something unthinkable happened. The power dynamic flipped, not because Ariel demanded submission, but because she demanded accountability from herself, too. She shared moments when she had failed to notice bias in her own hiring teams. Times she'd chosen silence in boardrooms to protect strategy over people. She owned her blind spots, and that's when the room softened. Because unlike every keynote they'd ever heard, this wasn't performance. This was leadership. Later, during a breakout session, one union director asked Ariel, "How did you stay calm after that slap?" A hush fell again. Ariel didn't respond right away. Then, softly, she said, "Because I've been slapped before, just not always with hands." That line rippled like thunder, and every woman in the room, especially the women of color, felt it. By evening, the summit was nearing its end. The final agenda item was a single piece of paper titled, The Dignity Accord. Ariel stood in the center of the room. This isn't a PR stunt, she said. This is a binding policy agreement. By signing this, you're committing to annual equity audits, blind promotion evaluations, frontline listening tours, and a rotating council of frontline workers who can override executive hiring decisions if bias is detected. A pause. You will be watched, held accountable, by the people you employ, not the ones you wine and dine. One CEO asked, "And if we don't sign it?" Ariel smiled. "Then you'll be disqualified from future StoriesDisrespect-us partnerships, technology sharing, and vendor contracts. And, well," she leaned slightly forward. "Good luck explaining that to your shareholders." One by one they signed, some with hesitation, others with conviction, but all with the knowledge. This wasn't a wave, it was a new altitude. The next morning, Ariel walked into the StoriesDisrespect-us headquarters with a printed copy of the Dignity Accord framed in gold and hung it in the main lobby. Employees gathered around to take photos. Not selfies. Receipts. Proof that someone didn't just speak up, but stood up for them. Online, the public reaction was seismic. The summit became legend within 48 hours. Hashtag Dignity Offensive trended globally. Journalists called it the first corporate peace treaty written by a black woman who refused to go to war. But what mattered most to Ariel weren't the headlines. It was the dozens of internal memos from airlines vowing to adopt similar models. It was the email from a former janitor now leading DI reform at a regional carrier. It was the note slid under her office door, handwritten by a young Latina gate agent. Because of you, I'm not afraid to speak with my real voice anymore. Ariel didn't change the world that day, but she had changed its altitude, and the view was never going to look the same again. It had been 31 days since the slap that changed the sky. In just 1 month, Ariel Moncrief had gone from silent passenger to global symbol. But while the world couldn't stop talking about her, posting, praising, reacting, quoting, Ariel herself remained quiet. Not because she had nothing left to say, but because she knew the difference between a statement and a legacy. She was back in the air again, now aboard Astrius 1, Seat 1A, but this time, not as a passenger. As a presence. No cameras, no reporters, no entourage, just her, a notebook, and the hum of altitude holding her. The plane soared above 35,000 feet, slicing through pink-tinted clouds, flying not toward a destination, but away from something heavier, a world that wanted her to forget, forgive, and move on too quickly. She wouldn't. Across from her sat a young flight attendant named Jules, no older than 24. Nervous, upright, avoiding eye contact, but clearly holding something. Ariel noticed. First time on this route? She asked, voice soft. Jules nodded. Yes, ma'am. First time with executive flights. Ariel smiled. You've earned it. Jules finally looked at her, eyes uncertain, but filled with something deeper, longing, gratitude, courage. I just want to say thank you, Jules said. What you did, it made it easier for people like me to stay in this field. Ariel leaned back, watching the clouds roll beside her. No one should have to make history just to be treated human, she replied. Jules blinked. Then why did you stay so composed? How did you stay so calm? Ariel looked out the window, and then said, because I knew the sky was watching, and I didn't want it to forget who I was. Back on the ground, something else had been quietly brewing. Without public announcement, without press coverage, Astrius began funding scholarships for young people of color entering aviation, aeronautical engineering, and airline operations. They didn't name it after Ariel. She refused. It's not about me, she told the board. It's about everyone who was told you don't look like you belong. They called it Project 1A. A seat at the front, not because of wealth, but because of worth. In the months that followed, other industries took notice. Tech companies began auditing their internal complaint systems. Luxury brands began hiring people who'd been historically filtered out. Airlines that once ignored her were now licensing Astrius equity training modules. But Ariel didn't attend the ribbon cuttings. She didn't pose for cover shoots. She spent most of her time doing what she always had, watching the system quietly and reprogramming it piece by piece. She believed true change was like wind, it didn't need credit, just direction. Then one afternoon, while leaving a flight from Chicago, she was approached by a man in his late 70s. Dressed in a weathered blazer, a pilot's pin still clipped to the lapel. He looked at her like he'd been waiting years to meet her. You probably don't know my name, he said. Ariel smiled gently. No, sir, but I see your eyes. My name's Captain Leonard Green. First black commercial pilot hired by Columbia Airways in 1972. First to be ignored. First to be hazed. First to be forgotten. Ariel stood a little straighter. Captain Green reached into his blazer and handed her a folded photo. In it, he stood beside a vintage aircraft. His skin darker than the rest of the crew. His name missing from the handwritten caption. I flew my last plane 22 years ago, he said. But what you did, you just made the sky ours again. Ariel held the photo with reverence. IT wasn't praise, IT was permission. Later that night, she walked alone into a quiet hangar where it all started. The first Astrius plane ever built. She stood in silence for nearly 15 minutes, running her hand gently along the fuselage. And then, to no one in particular, she whispered, "You carry all of us now." The walls didn't answer, but the stillness did. Back at headquarters, someone had mounted a new plaque in the lobby without asking her permission. She hadn't seen it yet. It read, "The sky doesn't belong to who gets there first. It belongs to who dares to fly when the world tries to ground them." In honor of Ariel Moncrief, who taught us that dignity travels farther than noise. She saw it. She didn't ask for its removal. She just nodded and walked on. In a world that had tried to erase her, ignore her, then co-opt her, Ariel didn't fade. She didn't shout. She simply rose, not with turbulence, with altitude. Because some leaders don't need stages. Some don't need spotlights. Some don't even need applause. They just need the truth, a steady hand, and a sky that remembers their name. In a world that constantly asks you to prove your worth before granting you dignity, Ariel Moncrief's story is a reminder that true leadership doesn't raise its voice, it raises the standard. She didn't respond with anger. She responded with architecture, rebuilding a system designed to exclude her into one that empowers those who were never meant to rise. The lesson? Dignity is not silence. It's strategy. And when wielded with precision, it becomes a force stronger than noise, sharper than retaliation, and more enduring than applause. Ariel didn't just reclaim her seat. She redefined who's allowed to take flight. If this story made you feel something, if it made you reflect, get angry, or even inspired you to stand taller, don't scroll past. Because silence is how systems survive. But your comment, your share, your voice, that's how we disrupt the sky. Drop a comment right now. What part of this story hit you the hardest? Like this video if you believe dignity should never be up for debate. Subscribe to this channel so you never miss stories that speak truth to power. Let's not just tell stories. Let's build a community that flies higher together.